So I feel quite a bit of pressure. This is apparently, and I don't know if I'm supposed to tell you this or not, the biggest crowd in terms of registrations for this event. So we're super excited. We have the best guest that I've ever hosted doing this. This is also my first time doing it, but this will be the best. I should also add that you can tell from my accent that while I've lived in Chicago for a decade, over 2 stints, that I'm not from here. As soon as Deb starts talking, you realize you have 2 Southerners up here who we set up time ahead of time to talk, and we ran out of time in an hour. So there's a lot to cover, and Southerners love to tell stories. So you didn't come here to hear me. You came here to hear Deb, and I'll start with a really, what I found to be a very good one. Deb, can you tell us about Evidation Health?
Yeah, that's always the first question. It usually goes something like, can you tell me what your company actually does?
Actually, can you tell us what your company actually does?
So at Evidation, we're a software company in California that is based in San Mateo and Santa Barbara, and we focus on using the data streams that flow through us every day outside brick and mortar walls. I like to think of it as, we're patients part of our lives. We're people and consumers all of our lives. And so we sort of look at the way of defining clinical outcomes as being a function of that. And using the ubiquity of digital and connected devices, wearables, in our daily lives as a vehicle for quantifying health outcomes in a whole new way. And when you use that, the benefit becomes obvious really quickly, which is when you're no longer constrained by geography, or you're no longer constrained by scale, or you're no longer constrained by data type, in the sense that almost anything becomes possible, then the question becomes what's useful. And so at Evidation, another way to think about what we do is we're finding ways to identify what's working or not for people in the digital era of medicine using all new types of data that we as consumers and patients own and control. So let's put a pin in that, and there's going to be some follow-up questions.
So there's a lot of folks here that are thinking a lot about this. Talk about how Evidation's different from what's out there today.
So it's hard for me to answer that question and not, risk coming across in sort of a pat myself on the back kind of way. But
consider yourself patted.
Okay.
All of us.
I think one of the ways that we're different is if you look at the way that Christine Lemke, who's the president and the founder and runs the technology side of Evidation, the way that we embody leadership at the company is very much the way we've built the company, which is every problem must be looked at through a lens of tech and a lens of healthcare in equal measure. Even now, most digital health companies aren't formed that way. They're either healthcare companies that are coming into technology or they're technology companies that are coming into healthcare. We really, truly did it a little bit differently. And so you're just as likely to be in a meeting with somebody who used to work at Genentech as you are with somebody that used to work at Pinterest or Google. And so I think that's one way we're different. I think another way we're different is a function of what we're trying to do, which is we've looked at patient centricity in a bit of a different way. Lots of people have been looking at the patient-centric nature of healthcare, making things more patient-controlled and patient-centric and patient-designed and patient-focused. We've sort of taken that and said, one step further than that, the whole future of healthcare is going to be based on patient-controlled data. And that, I think, is quite different, right? There's a lot of debates that we get into, we meaning all the stakeholders in healthcare, that I think are, in some cases, kind of inefficient debates and maybe useless debates, to be really pejorative about it, about data ownership. What if every one of those conversations started and ended with the fact that patient owns every bit of the data? Now what's the business model? Now how does it change what we're trying to do in digital health? And so we really do build everything, whether it's a policy of data ownership or a policy around informed consent or a business model around use of data, everything starts with patient mediation of data. And I think we're not the only company thinking that way. I'm not suggesting that. But I think when you start to sort of build these things that I think do make us different individually, you can start to get the feel for how maybe it feels a little bit different at Evidation.
It seems like I've already made you go more commercial than you wanted to, and you told me back there.
I did. I said
you
this
did not
is not an
want this to
Evidation
be a commercial. But I found as I've gotten to know you and Evidation that you had some examples of some of the work that you're doing. And I know that folks would want to get into more to the story and the entrepreneurship and how you got here. But I think just an example of what Evidation's doing will give folks a sense of how different it is.
Okay. So we spend most of our time working with partners in pharma and biotech, number one. Number two, large U.S. health plans. And number three, and by the way, these aren't priority order, I should say that, to the large health plans and the digital channel that I'm about to mention. We also do a lot of work, number three, with digital health companies and that are developing or commercializing different aspects of products and platforms in healthcare. The thing that ties all that work together is that they're all looking to quantify the impact of these products differently. Most cases outside brick and mortar walls, in all cases using different types of data streams than have ever been used before. This can take the form of doing a randomized pivotal trial completely outside brick and mortar, completely sitelessly, in all 50 states, looking at a digital therapeutic in cognitive decline and measuring the impact of whether that product appears to have an efficacy signal or not. And that's something that we're in the process of doing now. Another example that one of our original DARPA grants was answering the question, can you design very smartly tailored, simple, elegant digital interventions that are purely mobile-based? In their simplistic form, it could even be text-based, but timed and targeted in such a way that you can real-time impact the vaccination rate or pattern of vaccinations in the flu season, like as it's happening. And so one of our initial DARPA grants tested exactly that. And that data is in review. And so I'll not suggest what we found, but I will say it's very exciting. Another area that we're working a lot in, which I did mention earlier already, is a cognitive decline. We're another DARPA grant we have with MIT and Boston University is using voice data from the cognitive cohort of Framingham to really try and understand different types of digital biomarkers that are going to be able to identify people who are in very early cognitive decline, way before they have an Alzheimer's diagnosis. This is quite important because the drugs that perhaps are struggling right now in phase 3 trials in that space, it doesn't appear, or I should say the opposite, it appears that there may be signal in the earlier stages of disease. And so then the trick becomes, how do you find people at early stages of cognitive decline? But they're not necessarily realizing it. Their family and friends may not be necessarily realizing it. And so the answer to that at scale is probably going to be some data that is passively continuously gathered. And so we view that as a big digital biomarker problem using consumer data streams. And so that's something that we're working on right now with Boston University.
Digital biomarker sort of suggests, as I think this group's picking up on, that Deb is terrifyingly smart and would be fun to hear just that's what you're doing today. What in your background prepared you to take on that giant problem?
My previous company was in molecular diagnostics in genomics, and you and I talked about this when we talked on the phone, and those of you who might know me know that I have this very strong opinion about the digital health space and its evolution as a sector, and how it is in many ways mimicking what happened after the Human Genome Project was completed, which I think was the most recent time period where we in healthcare had this massive wave of completely new information, like all of a sudden sweep over us. What's different is that the sampling process is immediate. Like people that know how the molecular medicine space evolved, one of the biggest challenges actually was not on the computational side. Once the computational capability was in place, it was like getting the samples and getting the cohorts together to be sampled to actually get the data to fit into the computational platforms. Here, the sampling is very fast, right? Literally, as the data is flowing through these products. And so I think that makes it quite different. But that understanding that business model and having lived it and having seen the hurdles both on the payment side, the product development side, and the adoption side, give me a very specific lens to look through when I think about digital health, which is now a wave of massively new information that's entering into healthcare. That's number one. I think number two is, most of my career has been, I've been very blessed to have been given the chance to sort of operate at with the responsibility of trying to identify patterns of what was going to be successful 5 years out, 10 years out, 15 years out. And I'm not saying that I'm great at it. I'm saying that there's a way of thinking that way, and there are ways to pattern, that you begin to pattern match to adoption trends over time that I think are still in play right now. Even though the digital health space seems to be moving faster, it's still following a lot of patterns that I think we've seen in these other revolutions, whether it was combination products and drug delivery, or nanotechnology entrance into drug delivery, or genomic medicine.
Let's talk a little bit about you and Evidation, where it came from. Tell us the story of how you got the company started.
So I was previously at CardioDX when I was chief commercial officer. GE had also been invested in that company. GE Ventures was an investor in that company. And Rowan Chapman, who at the time was, in 2014, was running new business creation for GE Ventures. And I had known Rowan because she had been at Moore Davidow, and they had invested in CardioDX. And that's kind of how Silicon Valley works. In some ways, you just know these people over time. And she called me and said, I really am interested in, we're going to be starting this company. Not really sure exactly what it's going to look like yet, but here's kind of the thesis. We're going to do a Series A around it, and I need a CEO. And I think that you've got a great Rolodex, and you kind of get what this person needs to think about and the lens they need to look through. Can you give me some names? And I honestly, this was not in any way intentional what happened, but what happened was I said, sure, I'll do that. And so we got on the phone, and 5 or 10 minutes into the conversation, I stopped her and I said, I got to stop you. In the spirit of full disclosure, I'm not giving you any names. And there was this sort of pregnant pause, because Rowan and I have known each other for 10 years, and she's like, what are you talking about? Like, why wouldn't you? And I said, I think I want that job. And now, the sticky wicket here was that I technically was still employed by CardioDX at the time. Although I had resigned, it was not public yet. And so Rowan did not know that I had resigned. And she's like, I can't recruit you, because that's like, heretical. You can't like be an investor in one company and recruit and put it into your next company. And I said, you don't have to. I've resigned. It's not public yet, but it will be a transition over the next 3 months. And I should throw my hat into the ring. If it's right, it's right. And so we went there, got a CEO job. Along the way, she made an introduction between Christine Lemke and I one day at GE Ventures, and Christine was running a company of 5 people who had developed this incredible technology engine that was really designed to really connect to anything and everything that would be data flowing through people in their lives. And Rowan, who I think is quite a great matchmaker of ideas and people, she said, I think you two should know each other. And then she walked out of the room. And Christine and I had this conversation that we thought would last 30 minutes. And 2 or 3 hours later, we walked out and said that we created Evidation. That's what was going to happen. And that doesn't, by the way, normally happen in Silicon Valley. It does not go that seamlessly by any means. But there were just a lot of planets that were aligning, and it was the right people at the right time with the right motivation.
Sorry, we didn't prepare for this next one. Talk about how you build your teams, because it seems like there was a scaffolding for this, and you were the first person brought in to run it. How did you end up building the team that you got?
So I early in my career at Guidant Corporation, and for people that may not know who Guidant was spun out of Eli Lilly in 1994, and in 2006 was bought by Boston Scientific, and the vascular division, which I was a part of, was sold to Abbott. In my job at Guidant, my career at Guidant, I learned something really, really important from watching the people who were really successful in that company. And it seemed to me that they were, before I really understood how big corporations worked, it seemed to me that they were choosing to do these really different things. And what they really were doing is it was just really encouraged to rotate around inside Guidant, and that was part of the leadership development. And what that taught me, when I really looked at how that was working on the ground there, is that the most successful teams were made of people who had never done the job before, or who were surrounding people were together that really had orthogonal skill sets. And I think that really impacted me. And so I consciously hire a lot of people now who know stuff I don't. It's pretty simple because that's pretty easy. There's a lot of people that know a lot of stuff I don't know. And Christine is a great example of that. Like, one of the things that really attracted me about running Evidation with Christine is that, you know, she started her career at Microsoft Xbox. That could not be further from where I started my career, right? We are radically different skill sets. And, you know, I tend to do that. I tend to build teams of people that I know are going to be smarter than me in a lot of areas. And I think together that means that we're collectively going to be better than others.
Yeah, it's just hearing you speak, I'm getting to ask you questions that I feel like I occasionally get asked, and I finally am realizing now in this moment why I get asked them. It's because they're not mine, but they're good questions. Tell us, what's been the biggest challenge in building Evidation?
Getting people to understand what we do. And so let me take some accountability for that.
It took 45 minutes for me. So.
Yeah, let me take some accountability for that. The hardest thing has been for us to articulate what we do in a way that doesn't take more than one meeting to get it. It's easier now because now we've got enough publications, we've got enough things that we talk about in the public domain, we've got enough use cases that it's a lot easier. But that's, in some ways, been the biggest challenge. That showed up, by the way, in fundraising for Series B, because I had to be able to explain to investors what we were doing, and that's a whole other audience to explain things a certain way too. And it was probably equally hard to explain to healthcare companies and investors around that time period of sort of late 2015, early 2016. It was just hard. It was really different. It's actually much easier now.
If that's been, what's the biggest surprise thus far?
The biggest surprise is the speed with which our pipeline has been now majority filled with pharma and biotech.
I'll use this as an opportunity to say we're going to be collecting some questions from folks here, so feel free. They'll pop up in the iPad here. So you have, we talked about this before, a bunch of experience in healthcare, really getting to the frontier of knowledge, 3 engineering degrees. What do you think it was that prepared you for this, and what would you do differently coming into this?
So how many engineers in the audience? Yeah. So engineering, I think, is a degree that really does one thing. There are different flavors of it, right? Whether you're a mechanical engineer, electrical engineer, chemical engineer, or et cetera. But it really fundamentally prepares you to deal with complexity in a very systematic way. And it's a very specific way of thinking. And I still do that. I mean, it's been a really long time since I built a prototype or ran code or programmed or anything like that, which I did when I was doing engineering work. But that way of thinking about the world is really just there, and it comes from that training. The thing, and that served me really, really well. This is the first part of your question. The second part of your question, the thing that I wish I had done differently is I am still really weak in finance, kind of because I don't like it. And anybody that's ever going to watch this at Evidation, particularly my finance guy, he's going to be laughing at this because he's like, yeah, that's totally true. It's just not something I enjoy, and it's kind of hard. I'm human. I don't like to do stuff I don't like. But if I had it to do over again, I would have made myself learn finance sooner than I had to be able to really understand business models. Doesn't mean I would have gotten an MBA. I still say I did my on-the-job MBA, but all the MBAs are like, right, yeah. Sorry, that was not meant to be an insult by any means. I think that's probably it's always been a weakness. It's still a weakness. It probably is always going to be a weakness, and I could have forced myself to learn that sooner.
One thing that I think a lot about and talk a lot about with the two guys that I started our business with is how the idea developed, because we romanticize this idea that there's an epiphany. Was there an epiphany when it hit you when you had to do this, or did you just sort of brick by brick get there?
I think the idea that there's this one moment of epiphany is historical revision. Because like really successful companies, they may not have massive pivots, but they are an evolution of thought. And sometimes those thoughts are occurring over weeks, sometimes they're occurring over months, those are occurring over years, often dictated by what worked in a given funding cycle and what worked in the market. That's reality, right? And so I don't know. I don't think there was this moment of like, oh yeah, we've got it. But there was this very sort of early recognition, and I already described it, that we really fundamentally believe that if you bet your business model on patients owning and controlling data, and that data will be a seminal part of the ecosystem of how healthcare defines value in the future. If you really, really, truly believe that, which we did and we do, then that one core belief kind of becomes the cornerstone of your business model in so many ways. And that was true. We agreed on that from the beginning. And when you really hold true to something like that, it does cause your business model to change over time.
That's the beginning. You've had a bunch of really impressive chunks of your career, and she's of no flight risk. I'm not saying that, but when will you know when you're done, Evidation's achieved what it needs to be, and you're going to go and do something else?
You look in the camera. Nobody at Evidation.
I know nothing extra. Yeah.
None of my board members are watching.
But you've solved a lot of problems, a lot of hard things. You've done a bunch of different stuff. When will you know when Evidation is doing what it's supposed to do? You're done with it. Evidation is finished.
So I've never been the person with like the 5-year plan. I've never like been a person that in my mind says, oh, I want to do this. I want this line on my resume. I want to have done. I'm not that great of a planner, to be honest. And similarly, I don't have in my mind this sort of fixed idea of this state of this company that where I personally am quote unquote done. What I think happens, it definitely happened to me at CardioDX. It didn't happen to me at Guidant because Guidant was bought and I made a decision to leave at that point. So I never saw it play out in that, if it would have played out in that setting. But certainly I do think that if you're really self-aware as a leader, and this is hard because it requires that you completely put ego aside and you truly, truly look at what's best for the company. I think that the company tells you when it's time. And it might be that, I mean, put aside the reality that your board might tell you that it's time. Let's put that aside. I mean, I think that if you're really paying attention, like when your contribution day to day is no longer unique to you, and or you're no longer, really adding value in a way that is materially moving the ball forward. My dad was a football coach, so you're going to hear me do this a lot. Like,
Southern, yeah.
Yeah, down the field a little bit every day. When that stops happening, it's time for a new quarterback. And I kind of think you got to be sensitive and watch for that. The nice thing about this is, at least in venture-backed companies, and actually in public companies too, the incentives are aligned if you really look at it, because you as the CEO, you as a management team member have equity in the company. You want the company, you are financially aligned to see the company be all it can be. And so the second that you're not contributing to that, it's time to find a new role. But again, you got to be really self-aware.
Shockingly mature way to think about the lack of ego in CEOs, but I'm impressed.
Agreed. He said it, I didn't.
And oh my God, do I now hope Mike is not watching this. So there are a few questions. That was a joke. There are a few questions here that I think clearly folks have an interest in. Two things. Despite our sort of Southern self-deprecating nature, people want to learn more about you, which we'll get into. And I think also want to learn a little bit more in a commercial sense about Evidation. Could you give us an example of, maybe not name the customer, but like the customer and the value proposition for that customer, and what Evidation has done to sort of deliver value to that?
Sure. So let me focus on some digital health company work, because I think that's in some ways some of the most straightforward, and has been also some of the most public. In many cases, companies that are, let's say, Series A, even Series V, mostly pre-Series V, where the milestone for funding is evidence. They need to be able to show evidence. And think of it as their phase 3 trial, or one of their phase 3 trials. They will come to us and they'll literally say, I need to show that my product does X, Y, and Z in D, E, and F population. It's a classic label claim evidence, sort of phase 3 pivotal. We do a lot of those. Right now, we're running one for NeuroTrack, which is a fantastic company. CEO is Ellie Kaplan, focused in digital diagnostics and therapeutics for cognitive decline in Alzheimer's. And you can imagine that doing those kinds of studies, on paper, the biostats look exactly the same as if they were a regular therapeutic company, right? Randomized trial, multi-arm, blah, blah, blah. But in practice, there's no sites. Everybody's enrolled virtually. Everybody's managed virtually. In effect, Evidation becomes like a site, right? Our platform becomes a site where these people are in a protocol virtually, sitelessly in our site. And it either works or it doesn't. And we get to follow up, and then a lot of times those companies, actually all the time in the digital health cases, they want that data published. And so if there is an academic PI, we will work with that academic PI as sort of the technology play and data science expertise on the publication. In many cases, the company, if it's a large consumer tech company, they may not want the data public. This is for their internal purposes, which is why it's so much of what we do we don't talk about, because it's either confidential for that partner or that data's in review and we can't talk about it yet. But that's one set of use cases, which is essentially doing health outcomes measurement for digital companies, but now everything can be quantified through completely siteless virtual means. I think on the pharma side, one of the more interesting use cases is in multiple sclerosis, where the question is, can you actually, it's a very simple question, complex answer. Can you, through common consumer level device activity data, actually see flare patterns in multiple sclerosis? And actually, you could do this for rheumatoid arthritis too. Any case where you actually have flare patterns in autoimmune disease. And can you see that in the signal? And if you can, what it means later is, that's another matter. But that is a digital biomarker problem, right? Can you actually identify digital phenotypes of patients, or digital biomarkers for those patients that is a surrogate measure for flares or for activity in autoimmune disease? That's something that we're doing a lot of. And we were talking about this earlier here today at Matter, and sort of having a roundtable about where does all this digital biomarker work go. And I think that very much in the way that molecular biomarkers, were new endpoints, new surrogate measures, in some cases companion diagnostics for therapeutics. I think the same thing is going to happen. Only difference is I think this is going to happen faster because the sampling process is so fast, and you can do these things so quickly, right?
So there's, as I said, there were people interested in Evidation. There's people interested in you, and there's some combination of those two things. I think there's some folks who are looking for some advice. There's a lot of entrepreneurs in the room. I would love some advice as well. If you could speak a little bit, so despite what the email that went out said, I'm actually not a CEO. I would love to know, and I think there's some folks who here would want to know, what do you look for from your senior team as a CEO making decisions? What are you looking for from those folks to help you do your job?
Yeah, I think it's almost a cop-out answer to say I'm looking for information, because that's not quite it. I'm looking for people to elevate issues, not because I feel like I'm the best person to solve them. I might be the best person to unclench them, right? But I'm looking for people to give me information that I don't know, either because it's not my area of expertise and I need to understand it, or it's stuff I really need to know because we as a company need to deal with it, and they may not be looking through a lens that I look through, which is largely external, right, from a different audience. Like, they may be looking at things that perhaps aren't problematic at all from an internal perspective, from a customer perspective, but perhaps I need to understand them in terms of what it might mean for an investor audience. So I'm looking for information, number one. Number two, I'm really looking for people to step up and develop leaders in the company. I really believe we have a responsibility, particularly in small companies, because in small companies, people are giving a lot, they're taking risks to be there, right? I mean, I think we have 70 people at Evidation right now, which in my mind, let's multiply that times 3 or 4. I've actually got a few hundred that I'm responsible for when I count all the kids and spouses and partners. And I take that really seriously. And so I think what I really want to make sure of is when we have a senior team that's on the ground in the company every day, that we are actively developing leadership and that we are developing individuals to do the Army thing, be all they can be. But I take that really seriously. And if people are just in it for themselves, I don't care how smart you are, I just want you doing individual contribution. I don't necessarily want you leading huge teams of people. And so it's this combination of, give me information that's going to help us run a great company and help me manage a great company on the outside. And two, let's all hold hands and develop great people. Because at the end of the day, we're all individuals coming together and devoting part of our lives to this thing, this company, whatever it is, right? And I think we owe something back for that. And so I want my senior team to take that seriously.
I love that you went to people, because that's one of the things I've learned most from our CEO. Happens to be one of my best friends, but I learned a lot from our CEO's management of people. This is just general management style. Tell us about your management style and what you would tell people maybe managing folks for the first time or facing those challenges. What advice would you give?
I have a really, I'll say I have a pretty decentralized management style. It sort of cuts both ways in terms of the last two things I said. Decentralized management style, when combined with putting leaders in positions that you're actively developing, that's not without risk. But that does tend to be my style. It means that I've got to be able to really, really, really trust that people are going to be honest when they're feeling underwater or when they're feeling a little bit uncomfortable. And by the way, I actually believe, this is another part of my management style, I actually believe we should all be a little uncomfortable. I actually want people that don't quite know how to do their jobs perfectly every day, because I think it creates a healthy tension and a healthy drive to learn, and I think that's good for us as individuals and as a team. And so this sort of heavy decentralization of decision making combined with actively developing leaders means that you've got to be really ready to jump in when required. But it also means that I have to have people in those positions who are willing to pull me in and ask for help. But that hopefully is the culture that we create, what we try to do.
Yeah. Just on the people development, you started a conference a while back that I'm blown away by, that I think they would want to hear about. Can you tell us about the conference, what it is, where it is, how you ended up there?
Yeah, so in 2010, I was sitting in I'm going to tell you the story as I tell about the conference, because I'm from the South. So in 2010, I was sitting in a board meeting, and on my BlackBerry, God bless the roller, the tracker ball. I was sitting there and I get a text message from Amy Ramundo, who's now managing director at Kaiser Permanente in Oakland. And at the time, she was at another firm, and she was sitting at a conference, a medical device conference in Silicon Valley that I will keep anonymous.
Sometime early January.
And she texted me and she's like, what is with all the black and blue blazers? And I'm like,
thanks, by the way.
I know. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Are you speaking in code? And she's like, no, seriously, ask. Then she posed the inverse question. She's like, why is it that you and I know so many women in Silicon Valley in MedTech, and they are literally never on the stage at this particular conference, which is a very well-known conference in Silicon Valley? So I was like, yeah, I know, sucks, right? But I'm in a board meeting. I want to remind you of that. That's the context of this. I'm like, yeah. She texts me back, and she's like, we should start our own conference. And I'm like, yeah, we should. A few minutes go by, and she texts me back, and she's like, I'm serious. I'm like, okay, I got to pay attention to the board meeting now. I can't be distracted by whatever weird thing you're on. But then we agreed that we would get together, have drinks, and we realized that maybe this was not such a crazy thing, and that, in fact, maybe there really was a need to put a spotlight on women experts in medical devices and diagnostics. But first, we actually looked. We actually spent a whole exhaustive period of time looking to see if there was such a thing anywhere in the world. There was not. So we said, okay, well, here's a thing. And then we was like, is the thing valuable? Like, is there demand for the thing? And so we decided that we had to answer that in two ways. One, we had to, over drinks, of course, challenge ourselves to write down, I don't know, like front and back of a piece of paper, every woman, like real world-class expert that was a female in all these aspects of medical devices that we could get to. Like, it couldn't be more than 1 degree of separation away from either one of us, anywhere in the world, who would say yes if we asked them to come to a conference. And I think we decided like an arbitrary number of like 60. If we could find 60, that would be enough. We did that easily. And so then we're like, well, who's going to pay for this? Like, we don't have any money to pay for this. Like, how much is this going to cost in Silicon Valley? So then we decided we would do some market research. And so we went around to our friends and family in corporate development, in big corporates for MedTech, and law firms that were the service part of the industry in Silicon Valley, and also to venture capital firms. And we asked, if we did this, would you sponsor? We got a lot of different answers that ranged from absolutely do it to I don't know, like all women, I don't know, who's going to come to that? I mean, so we took all the data, we went back, and we're like, well, now we got to do it. Yeah. And so 2011 was our first conference. It's called MedTech Vision. It happens every year in Menlo Park at the Rosewood. And that first year, we were like, we have to sell this out. We have to sell this out, because what if nobody comes? Like, it's like really visibly, like we didn't care about ourselves, because like whatever, like just tried it and did our best. It was more that we worried that we couldn't field an audience to hear a bunch of women leaders. Like, what was that going to mean? So we really felt seriously about this. So I remember we had the phone tree exercise. Like, everybody comes back from July vacation, and we're like, okay, everybody has to email like 30 people you know, and you got to make sure they email 5 more. And so we had this elaborate like email phone tree thing that we're like, we're not going to not sell this out. And within 5 days, it's sold out every year since then. And in fact, this year, thank you. In fact, this year, I was in London on vacation the first week of July. We had just opened up registration, like the last week of June, and the email went out, like it's full, it's sold out. The waiting list has already got 100 people on it.
I'm glad you got to the superlatives, because I was going to kind of push you to do this. So.
No, and so it's been, I mean, from a BlackBerry text to, we're now, I think, on the list. I've seen us on the list of the top 30 healthcare conferences in the world now, and I mean, I'm stunned. Yeah. Because we didn't do it for that reason, but I'm so glad that we clearly tapped into something that needed to be done. And so now we're well funded. I won't say we turned down lots of money, but we have turned down money in some cases. And yeah, we have a waiting list every year now.
Yeah, insanely cool. So just to make the plug, the name of the conference?
MedTech Vision.
And men are allowed, but not allowed on stage.
Well, let me rephrase that, Griffin. Yes. Everyone is welcome. We have not yet had a man on stage.
Very well put. I love it. So I think this is probably the part of the program where it appears that I've lost control of my own consciousness, because we're gonna move across. I'm literally just gonna kind of go down the list here.
There's a bunch of questions on this.
As we get to lightning round. There's some question around I know this, that the data that you and your colleagues use in studies comes from literally probably millions of different sources. One of the sources is wearables. Can you talk about the population that you get that data from? Is there a skew? The question specifically around, is it more middle or upper class? But
yeah.
Where does that data come from, and how do you guys think about wearables data?
This is such an important question. I'm so glad somebody asked it. So when we first started doing this, I was very worried that the phrase I use is this just going to be a bunch of quantified selfers in the mission? San Francisco in the mission. Because I'm not sure that's useful to all of healthcare. That has not happened. In fact, it's almost the opposite. If you look at, those of you that have seen me present, you'll often see me present footprints, like enrollment footprints from some of our studies. And they are almost always in all 50 states, unless we restrict it, like for whatever reason. Like sometimes the inclusion criteria might be certain states or certain regions of the country. Like we're doing some value-based care work right now in the Great Lakes region. So we're not enrolling from California there. But when it's unrestricted and it's just open inclusion criteria with regard to geography, it's almost always across all the states. You will see natural fallout where you have cell phone signal fallout. That's where you see fallout. But other than that, the demographics are all social, economic demographics, pretty broad spectrum. I think our average age of we have sort of a constantly connected population of about 2 million people in the US right now that aren't necessarily in a given protocol at this moment, but who may be going in and out of protocols. I think the split of that, male-female, I think it's roughly 55-45, 55 female. That changes, obviously, over time. Therapeutic area-wise, we purposely do not limit it to certain therapeutic areas. However, we do really focus and double down in certain therapeutic areas when we know a big study is coming in a certain one that we know we're going to want to use or find people in. Cystic fibrosis is a good example. We're running a cystic fibrosis study right now. Obviously, not a hugely high prevalence condition by any means, but we've known that was coming. So we had done some work over the summer in cystic fibrosis to make sure that ecosystem was a bit wired up. But yeah, it's shockingly America. It's not quantified selfers in the mission at all.
Speaking of patients, there's a couple of ways of getting at this. Can you talk about patient privacy and ownership of their data in a model like this? So
first, I think it's important to point out that in healthcare, we unintentionally, I think, and unfortunately, mix together privacy and security into this giant ball of tangled yarn over the last several decades, and we're trying to unentrench them. And so I think it's really important when we talk about privacy to not confuse it with security. I think that most important aspect, one of the most important aspects around data privacy is making sure that when you're consenting a person, or when you're asking for consent to use data, that it really truly is that they really are understanding what they're consenting to. And I know this is not a challenge that's unique right now. This has always been a challenge in making sure that we do this in clinical trials in general, but this is subtly another aspect, right? Which is making sure that people understand that the information that they are under informed consent contributing to a study under their participation, that it is going to be used in this way and only this way, and that is privacy intent, right? That is very separate from security intent. I think the challenge that a lot of the challenges that people are talking about with regard to privacy are getting mixed up with security. And I think we really, really have to think about them differently. The other thing I'll say is that we're always doing work to try and understand in sort of these connected populations what people's perception is of these things, like people's willingness to participate in sort of this virtual sightless era of clinical research, and what that means to them, and how they understand data use and data ownership. And I'll say that people are perhaps more advanced than we think they are. Perhaps we need to be more trusting of people's intent and make sure that our attempt and our focus is understanding their intent, as opposed to getting hung up on these big privacy and security concerns sort of writ large. Don't forget that behind it all is patient intent, and we need to be really honing in on that.
You have this quote, which I wrote down. It's always funny when people quote you in front of you.
Yeah, this is great.
No, it's a good one. It says, data's just a bunch of numbers. Information's how you make a meaningful interpretation around an endpoint of interest. And one of the things that it's hard to kind of piece these questions together, but one of the things that there's some interest in, I certainly have some interest in, is it seems like you probably have clients who come to you and want a particular answer. Mm-hmm. Just talk about how there's an intellectual integrity that I know that you and your team has. How do you navigate that?
Let me make sure I understand your question. Like with regard to the way certain things can be answered?
Yeah, if you were going to use the data set to answer a question, mm-hmm. and they have a commercial interest in the answer being A, and you find that the answer may not be A.
Oh, sure, of course. Yeah, this is important. So when we set out to in any initial engagement, there's of course always some fundamental question of interest, and I like to believe, I think it's true, that our partners come to us because they do trust that we are going to be transparent with the information, number one, and rigorous with the answers, number two, and the methodologies that we apply to get those answers. There are layers of assurance around that, whether it's the statistical analysis plan or the IRB approval, or other layers of assurance around those things. But the nuance to the question you're asking around is really about what if a company finds out something that they didn't want to know, yeah, and the trial's negative. For us, the intent to publish is outlined way up front. And if they want the data to be published and have the right to the data, their call to be published. That's their call. To be honest, we haven't had a situation yet where the intent to publish turned out to be a negative trial. At some point, that will happen. We haven't faced it yet, but many of us at Evidation are PhDs by training, and so we were schooled in the notion that research is research and the answer is the answer. You may not like the answer, but it is what it is. But the reality is a lot of the work that we do at this phase of the game is still proprietary and confidential. And so it may be done in such a way that it is not the answer to a randomized pivotal that is a negative. It is exploratory research in advance of a randomized pivotal that might be positive. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it's you're solving hard problems, and it's just been interesting as I've gotten to know you, and sort of there's an intellectual rigor to this work that's a really consistent theme.
That's a good point. So we do everything we do, whether it is published or not, is done with the intent to withstand peer review. Everything. And if you look at our website, you can tell that one of the things that we've done from the beginning is really be seriously committed to our own internal research program, which is funded by us, right? And in addition to the work that we do with our partners, and everything we do should withstand peer review, period.
So we got a couple of minutes left here. Again, it's going to seemingly seem like I've lost total control of consciousness and directionality here, but can you talk about a lesson you learned, a tough lesson you learned early in your career that really shaped your leadership style today, being in charge of the hundreds of employees and dependents you were talking about?
Yeah. So if I go back to Guidant, and the job that I had in the last few years that I was that Guidant Corporation was Guidant before it was acquired, I was director of a team called New Ventures, which was kind of like the internal incubator in the vascular division. And for people that might know the story of case study of Guidant, we were under an acquisition scenario for a year by J&J, fully into an integration process with McKinsey and involved in all kinds of stuff for a year. Now imagine running a public company for a year that you were not only in an acquisition scenario, but you were already being integrated, and then have it fall apart at the 11th hour. How do you keep people motivated? How do you make sure that people understand that the market is the market, and it doesn't, just because a deal falls apart, doesn't have any impact on our clinical trial data, the product impact on patients, our patient business today versus tomorrow. Do you know what I mean? Like getting people to really, really understand. That was hard. It was hard for me because so much of what we were doing, so much of Guidant had people that stayed there for a long time. Our retention rates were extremely high. And so it was very common that you had people that had been there for 10 or 15 years. So there were people that were very, very vested in terms of stock grants and all kinds of things in this particular acquisition. And so it was distracting. But getting people to not embody the market view or market dynamics of what was going on with the acquisition and somehow not make that impactful into the view that we had of our own business and patient impact, that was hard. But it taught me that you have to let the market be the market. And you have to do things for patients that are the right things for patients. And God willing, there's a path that aligns them both, and that's the challenge of leadership in small companies, by the way, that are privately held as well, certainly as well as public companies. But at the end of the day, always, always, always forget, or never forget, remember that what you're doing is first and foremost about that clinical trial result, that patient impact, and the thing that you're going to do in the clinic tomorrow that you couldn't do today. And that taught me a lot very early, and it certainly was helpful when I was at CardioDX in the days where we were waiting on that Medicare decision, and the whole company is like waiting on that Medicare decision. But yeah, you can't forget that the market is what the market is. Yeah.
I was going to have one more. I think there's two more in here. So we talked about the getting started. We talked about the strategy. We talked about building teams. So now we've just intellectually gotten to where we have a thing. Talk about how you think about scaling. Because we also talked about what it's like when it's done and you're finished and you're not there.
Yeah.
So that we're missing this middle piece.
So my view of my maniacal focus about and obsession about scaling is actually the inverse. I am like a dog on the hunt for things that don't look scalable. And I will call it out in a meeting, and I will call it out in an all-hands discussion, and I will call it out, in a one-on-one. If we are doing stuff that this feels kludgy, this feels inefficient, this feels like duct tape, I call it out. And so to me, I'm less about looking for the one scalable best way to do it, and I'm squashing the millions of unscalable things that happen in startups as you grow. It's kind of a reverse optimization problem back to engineering, right? Because I got to make sure those things go away, because there's multiple paths to nirvana. There's multiple paths for scaling. There's no unique solution to that problem. There's a billion ways that I will go wrong, and I got to squash those.
I love it. It's not scaling. It's not scaling.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to read this. This is really cool. Then
Is this another quote?
No, but what I'll say is there is a question here, which is, Deb, what would it take for you to be my mentor? Assume I'm not crazy. Mad respect for you, which I think we're all feeling. Yeah.
Email me on LinkedIn.
Okay, so that is the honest answer. I was not going to put you on the spot, but
No, that's the honest answer. The reality is,
let's talk about mentorship, because I don't think you do the things you've done without somebody that's done there, and we're getting to that point where I'm trying to act cute and not ask for the advice you have for everybody, but like this is your chance to be the mentor. Mm-hmm. We'll have ridden off into the sunset.
I've said in public many times that I always take the meeting, and this is true. I always take the meeting. It might mean that it's a phone call, by the way, because it's a lot easier to do phone calls, right, in our current lives than it is to meet live. But I never ever say no. I mean, I really don't. And I know that you're probably thinking you're full of crap. No, I'm not. I'm really serious.
Suffer the same problem. Yeah.
Now, the caveat to this is I do absolutely insist on people that want guidance or just want to talk to me, that they have an objective. And I learned that, by the way, by somebody telling me that when I was early in my career at Guidant, and I had gone to meet with one of the presidents of the division, which I don't even know, I don't even know what I was doing in there. When I think back, I'm like, how did I get that meeting? I think I asked, and she didn't tell me no. And I remember her kind of scolding me for not having an objective for the meeting. And at the time, I was like, well, aren't we just hanging out? No, we're not just hanging out. Like, that's what I do at home, right? That's what I do at the bar with my friends. If God willing, there's a moment I can do that. But I think it's really important for people that want guidance to have a real clear objective. And by the way, that doesn't come across as harsh in any way. Like, have an objective for that particular meeting. And so that's the one thing that I kind of do like to really see. But I don't say no to the meeting.
A bunch of entrepreneurs here. We're at an incubator. What's your last piece of advice here for folks trying to build something to change the world?
It is very easy to get sucked into the mentality that you have to win every race, and you don't. The art of energy and time management, I think, is learning what races you absolutely have to win and train for them. Don't show up unprepared. But in those races where you just have to finish, just finish. Like, just finish, right? Because otherwise you're inefficient at energy and resource management. And that took me a while. Like, I had to, if people know the Enneagram, I'm an 8. Okay? I like to win. It doesn't mean I like to win because I like the gold medal. It means I like to win because it gets me to the next thing. But I learned that that's not what gets you to the next thing. Sometimes, but not always. And learning how to throttle gas is the art of not burning out when you're 25, I think.
Limitless fuel tank seems to help too. So this has been really fun for me. I hope our guests enjoyed our chat. I will tell you, I've been talking you up for about 3 weeks now, and I see.
Is that why all these people are here?
I don't have that big a network, but I don't know. I hope everybody will join me in saying mad respect. Thanks for being here.
Thanks.